La emisión está comenzando. Todos los asistentes están en modo de solo escucha.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining our new webinar on signals, understanding the coronavirus crisis. Before starting, I'd like to remind you that your microphones are muted by default. If you have any question, please feel free to write the question in the question dialog box that you'll find for that purpose. Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you, Natalia, and hello, everyone. We're very glad to have you with us for this second edition of our Signals webinar. We're all very keen to support you as we navigate together through these times of turmoil and difficult impacts on our works and on our lives. Our aim is to make it easy for you to access the wealth of information that we have and the research that we've been doing to help understand the dynamics of the crisis and make the right decisions in these times. So today we have in this session first Simon, who will update us on the story so far and how all this is impacting people around the world, with a very special guest from China, Kelly Yin, who will talk to us about her experience. Virginia will then talk about innovating in challenging times and how people, when their lives are disrupted, may be open to new ideas. And finally, Sean will talk about creative and how stories told by brands can be very welcome by people in these difficult times. And without any further introduction, let's go to Simon.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Pleased to be with you today. Just to pick up on Jennifer's introduction, what I'm trying to do now is to perhaps take stock of where people around the world are, what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And perhaps three early questions we might have for today could be to just remind ourselves of what the current climate seems to look like after we've gone through, let's say, a certain period of time. Many of us are researchers, of course, so we're looking for structure at a time when things may be rather less structured than we're used to. So we'll pause for a moment just to think about different phases that we might be expecting or indeed observing people going through, including ourselves. A pause briefly just to look at some of the material that's available to pick up on Jennifer's point to support you in your own work. And then as we start to look ahead, we're delighted to have Kelly with us to share some findings from the China experience to date. So just to kick off really on the current climate of opinion, this is from our latest tracking survey that we've been running every week since the start of February, 15 countries. And just to pick out a few findings, and there are many more that you can delve into, but the latest wave painted a picture, I would say, of firstly anxiousness about our own health. So in many markets, 30% of us being worried about our own health, and typically health surveys often have our self-diagnosis of our let's say of our own state of well-being running at a very positive level in most cases, only 30% now. Concern more broadly about society for those who are vulnerable, and again in many markets 50–60% are saying they are really worried about those who are vulnerable and weak, and it plays to some of the questions we're going to be talking about later, including around the role of brands and communication. And possible silver lining, for some at least, is the opportunity to spend more time with family and friends, with family that may be in closer proximity than usual, perhaps going through confinement, and with friends it may be in a slightly different way. They're distant, but they're close to us via the wonders of video technologies. So again, an important part of the experience, I guess, is this this way that we're all interacting with each other. I'll pick up on that in a moment. Coming on to this point about the different phases, clearly, yeah, we know that this is, it's such a fluid time. Everything is disrupted. How do we think about these different the process, if you like, that we're going through, which remains so uncertain? Those of you who were on our call a couple of weeks ago remember we looked at Spain And at that point, 55% of people in Spain self-identified themselves as being going through a period of adjustment. A week later, the median Spanish person had moved, and they were starting to be in the acclimatizing phase, if you like, according to their own perceptions. And this is a framework that we're starting to use in a number of different dimensions. One of the things, of course, to monitor are the feelings that we have as we go through this process. Often ones which might be negative or worrisome, but perhaps there may be times when there are some more inspiring and hopeful moments. And I guess as we do that, clearly the obvious reminder for us is that we need to be careful about generalizations. Things will vary by country, by segment, and indeed over time. And with that in mind, two countries which perhaps, let's say, or have been at an earlier phase are the UK and the US. And just a couple of figures that I drew out of the data that we've got from the last couple of weeks, which just remind us of how quickly this all happened. To take the example of the US, in just 2 weeks, the proportion of people self-quarantining went from being a small minority to 175 million, 53% of the population in just that very short space of time. In my own country, in the UK, for example, again, in a couple of weeks, we moved from a quarter of us avoiding leaving our house to 3/4 of us avoiding leaving our house. So as this process, if you like, and the different phases take shape, one of the things is we need to remind ourselves is that perhaps different phases may have different time periods, and we'll perhaps touch on that as we start to look at China in a moment. I mentioned I just wanted to pause just to reflect on some of the information that we have available. Very conscious that you will have perhaps a whole range of sources that you're grappling with. And to Jennifer's opening point, our hope is that we can help provide you with, if you like, a framework or some reference points to help your own work. So on our website, we've got a coronavirus homepage, pushing things out, of course, via social media, but things just to look out for as and when you need them, and your Ipsos colleagues and partners will be with you to guide you here. The latest tracker research is all there. There's also homepages for around 20 individual markets if you're wanting to go deeper. We're going to hear from Sean and Virginia in a moment with some of our expert analysis. And then every couple of weeks, we try to bring what we've learned together into a research digest using our signals framework, if you like, as we try to identify, if you like, signs and tangible takeaways to help us all understand better what's happening at the moment. And in terms of understanding what's happening at the moment, clearly one of the important reference points for anybody trying to understand the crisis and its aftermath is China. As I mentioned, we're delighted to have Kelly with us in a moment. She is the service line leader for our qualitative in China. A couple of weeks ago, those of you who are on the webinar, we shared with you our impact and recovery report, which Kelly and team put together. And one of the useful things we were finding from that report was the checklist it gave us, if you like, reflecting on the experience of people in confinement. What are the different topics and themes that emerge that we need to, as a minimum, keep an eye on, and depending on our own work or our own organisation, we need to be absolutely in touch with. Since that time, we've now got 3 new reports coming from the China team, which hopefully can support us around the world, actually, also in understanding perhaps both how people feel and also this point about the future behaviours that may endure after the crisis is over. So one of the things our team noticed was increased searches early in the process on around coffee stocks, and that being linked to questions around security and not having something which I actually need in my life. A different segment, a more affluent segment, if you like, was busy, and we've already seen this in increased sales of coffee machines. Again, something that was lost in my daily life as I go around my business and at work, the opportunity perhaps to at least in some ways regain the routine. So some of that kind of mindset of people coming out of this report. Similarly, the report that the team put together on dairy, looking at both the impact and the future outlook, has identified a number of potential areas for growth in that sector. One of them comes directly out of the confinement experience with the growth of home baking. Another perhaps links more generally with perhaps how we may be changing as the weeks and months move on, in terms of, in this case, the contribution of dairy to a more healthy and balanced diet, if you like. And on that point about health and wellness, the third report we wanted just to flag and share is around cherishing life and enhancing immunity, which was the big theme that came through when the team looked at learnings, if you like, from this, if you like, critical aspect of our lives. And one of the things they looked at was perhaps the moods people were perhaps in before compared with now. So perhaps I take this particular product sometimes, to no, now we're all taking this in our household and we're all taking it regularly. Another change perhaps in mood or indeed in environment is from perhaps being skeptical about some new products that might be available to I'll try it, why not? I'm looking at additional ways to keep myself healthy and immune. And for perhaps other segments of the markets, maybe more conservative or older age groups, there may be some products quite established which they haven't traditionally felt are for them, but now I'm going to try this. I need this now as part of my overall program. So those are just three of the new things we've got coming out of the China team. We're delighted to have Kelly with us today, joining us from Shanghai. Kelly, hello, how are you? Nice to talk to you.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. Yeah.
Thanks so much to you and the team for the work you've been doing and sharing with us for the webinar today, and we can make this available afterwards. We're just really interested in your experiences so far. You know, having, if you like, gone through this process for months rather than weeks, which is the case in some other parts of the world. How would you describe the if you like, the current mood in China today?
Overall, I would say we are quite calm because China has already, stepped out of the worst situation. But the reality, we're still a little bit worried and a little bit surprised because we don't know when this situation will end and when to expect for an economic recovery. Even the most robust stock market in US, which was suspend transaction for several times. So the entire world is unbelievable. So all this kind of uncertainty led to a little bit anxiety that still exists, I would say. Yeah.
Well, I think that was something that came through in the research reports that came from China, like the searching for my coffee supplies and things like that. Thinking back about the research that you and your team and your colleagues have been doing with our clients in China, what's been the biggest surprise to you as you've been analysing and thinking about the results and their implications?
Okay, so the biggest surprise, I would say, people are very much willing to adapt to online survey, especially talk. They want to be connected. Mm-hmm. They want contact and human greetings. So mm-hmm. This is the very much strong voice I can see. And also among lots of the strangers, they are very much willing to volunteer lots of the activities. So we do see lots of mutual assistance and a rescuing effort among them. Mm-hmm. And also, I would say people are very much brave than we thought, mm-hmm. especially for young citizens. They are very much brave to voice out, mm-hmm. to criticize, I would say, criticize things about the public health policies and the measures taken by the government. Mm-hmm. Simply, they wanted their voice to be heard, and mm-hmm. they wanted which could bring positive changes to the things. So all these things, I would say these are the biggest surprises from my side. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting about that. So from a kind of human perspective, there's getting the voice out there and talking about this in terms of the experience and making it heard. But that human side of the research, if you like, was interesting too, about people actually wanting and being interested in participating in studies. That's something that we will need to reflect on. What we were talking before the webinar about your own experience, if you like, as a daughter, as a mother, and as a researcher. I mean, you know, we're all kind of thinking about how this impacts on our own lives. You know, I'm talking to you from my upstairs bedroom in London. How would you describe the impact on you as a person, having gone through this process?
Well, that's a really interesting question. As a person, actually, you know, during the most difficult time, my parents moved in, and they helped us together taking care of my kids. The last time when we lived with each other, it was 14 years ago when I was still single. Yes, 14 years. So the difference is very much different. But I'm truly grateful, you know. That was about 2 weeks ago. My dad told me he decided to buy a pair of hearing aid devices because he wants to hear and communicate with my daughter clearly. So I realized I'm no longer the driver. My daughter is.
Wow.
and also he made his first video.
Yeah.
He learned how to make the video. He made his first video, which was about drinking coffee at home and how his behavior evolved. And I shared this video with my client. They're extremely happy and you know, thoughtful. So I think all these kind of things is really interesting. But with regards to this kind of a change, you know, when my father decided to embrace the new product and the new technology, I decided to use the most traditional way to say thank you to my clients. So I handwrote a few thank you cards with a selected Chinese poem to my clients, for those who we have been working with each other for many years, especially during this, you know, this February, this March. And I think everyone is trying the best. And I think we will carry on. So this is the, you know, the true story from China.
Oh, thank you. That's a real takeaway, isn't it? So your father's embracing the new traditions of videos, and you're perhaps embracing some older and longer term traditions in terms of the thank you card. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing that experience.
It was great to hear this very personal touch. I almost had tears in my eyes. Very moving. Thank you so much, Kelly. Maybe just one last point before we pass to the next topic. Would you what kind of very quick advice or tip would you give to people who are, you know, behind you in this process and are now starting to be confined at home?
Oh, I would like to take the quote from our idol doctor, who said this from the very, you know, early stage. Our doctor Zhang Wenhong said, the virus wouldn't gonna be bored to death if we keep ourselves staying at home. So our advice is stay home, stay safe, but think active. We need to think about our business focus. You know, we need to think about the people we are going to serve with better product, with better service. I think this is the luxury time for us to rethink and review.
Thank you. Very inspiring. Thank you very much, Kelly. And so this is a perfect moment to pass on to Virginia to talk to us about innovation in these disrupted times. We can't hear you, Virginia. I think you need to turn your mic on.
Hello?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Great. Today I'm going to share with you some data that we actually collected from our database of FMCG products. There's about 45,000 concepts across 93 countries. And what we did was compare concept data from the last financial crisis or the Great Recession with concept data from more recent years. So we looked at 2008 to 2009 versus 2016 to 2019. Now, we of course realize that the current crisis is quite different, but there still is a severe financial impact in addition to the health crisis. So we think the results provide valuable learning. The database that we have is relational, meaning that we're always looking at an innovation relative to the most often product that the consumer uses. And this is actually quite important because a crisis can impact how a consumer views a new product or innovation and the product that they use most often. So evaluating an innovation in a relative context provides very stable and predictive data, which is good for looking at trends over time. The first thing that we found is that people actually rated their current product lower on relevance. So during the financial crisis, if we averaged, the response on relevance as 100, then we indexed that to more recent years, it was actually 106. So people were actually more critical of their current product and now actually more open to new innovations. And we think this is true because their usual habits have been disrupted and they're more open to new solutions than they've been in the past. And this is not a surprising finding, but it does confirm that value will be very important. So during the last financial crisis, concepts perceived to be a good value were more likely to achieve a higher trial potential than other concepts. And in more recent years, premium concepts performed better. But I think we're going to go back and see that value is going to continue to be important. And some of these behavior changes may actually stick. When we look at the impact from the crisis last time and consumer confidence, it really took some time for it to return. And this does have an impact on what we're doing. So we're going to see that things that people are doing today, they're probably going to continue to do for some years to come. And this will affect existing pipelines where you may need to realign or adapt the strategies you had planned for launch, or in identifying new innovations. So this is really a time when people are very open to change as they're forming new habits. So it is very important to determine what resonates with consumers. Okay, slide's not moving. There we go. Now, since consumers' mindsets and behaviors and priorities are going to shift, they are going to respond differently to different categories. So here's just a few things that we expect to see. Health and hygiene, of course, will be important as there's increased concerns about staying healthy and being safe. Food and beverages that include ingredients to promote immunity and sustained well-being will be important. Cooking at home, of course, is going to grow, and I think will stay around for some time. In this area, convenience will be important, and people will look to comfort foods and potentially sort of small luxury foods, small indulgent moments like chocolate will be important. Personal care treatments, even though people can't go out for kind of their grooming, I think they'll find alternatives to use that they can do themselves at home. And then forced usage of digital services will help overcome some of the barriers to adoption that we see now, such as maybe online banking, leading to a larger base of users who will probably stay with that service. New business models will thrive, and I think they're doing that now as people look to subscription models and memberships and clubs and apps to kind of add simplicity and even safety to their lives and in ways to connect with other people. Large home appliances will probably decline a bit because generally they're bought under duress, so the current one breaks or for an upgrade, and replacements will probably be lower value and upgrades will likely be delayed. And then finally, smaller smart devices such as smart speakers or VR for gaming will likely see a boost as people are they're staying indoors more and they're trying to engage the family. One of the things that will become a bit more complex for us as researchers is forecasting. So it's going to require more scenario planning. You know, with changing social and economic variables are really unknown. So what is the speed to recovery? Will consumer confidence come back and how quickly? There may need to be for forecasting different scenarios. So if there's a fast peak and then a fast return to the virus versus a reoccurring kind of thing and then more normalized behavior, and then scenario C, which would be that the virus is kind of flattened but long lasting. All of these things really do affect sales dynamics and shifts in buying. So will people continue to stockpile? What types of products will they buy? Will they buy more at once and less of a range than they would buy if they actually went into the store? So all of these things will need to be taken into consideration. And also with so much change going on in consumers' lives right now, it's really important that we measure not only what they say, but actually what they do. So things like observing what consumers do at shelf is going to be very important. And one of the ways to adapt to the social distancing, no touch kind of mentality would be perhaps virtual shopping with testing. And we've done a lot of comparisons between in-store shopping and virtual shopping, and we found a 92% correlation between the two. So I think it's very safe to move to a virtual shopping environment to better understand consumers. The other thing is the growth of e-com. It's going to be really important to make sure that you understand how an innovation performs in an e-com environment, because as you can even see between these two pictures, it's not the same view and it's not the same shopping experience for a consumer. There are a lot of simulated platforms out there that can help you understand e-com. They give flexibility of being, confidentiality of your innovation, flexibility to test at any stage, and can give some very rich diagnostics. And we've also done some comparison between consumer behavior on a simulated e-com platform versus real e-com, and we've seen an 89% correlation there. So really, in summary, consumers are definitely more open to new ideas since their habits have been disrupted. Understand what resonates with them and what's going to be important to them is key. Some changes in attitudes and behavior will become permanent. Sales forecasting will require more scenario planning to account for unknown social and economic variables and shifts in behavior, and understanding innovation performance in an e-com environment, and very importantly, how it can be integrated with consumer behavior at shelf. So you don't want to just look at each one of those in isolation. Ideally, you'd want to bring them both together for a more holistic understanding of how consumers will behave. So, as consumers are adjusting to the new normal, doing things they didn't do before. So this is some of my team. This is managing working and childcare at the same time, finding interesting new office spaces to work in. And yes, that is a roll of toilet paper in the corner. So Supriya was being very creative there. New work colleagues that we didn't have before. Multitasking, where you're kind of working, feeding the family at the same time. And creative solutions to a stand-up desk. So that is actually sitting right next to me in my own office, so I can sit and stand throughout the day. So a really interesting conclusion. Now is really an excellent time to be innovating because people are open and their habits have changed and things are different.
Sorry, I was muted. So lots of great stuff to think about. So not business as usual, but really a new normal. I was wondering, as you went through those results of the database analysis that you showed earlier, what was the most sort of aha moment for you looking at what came out?
Yeah, when we went in to do some data mining, we really didn't know what to expect. And I was very surprised that people were actually more open to innovations during this time. You might think that they would kind of stick with usual habits, but the opposite ended up being true. And I could say separately, if I had to pick one category that people were going to fight over in stores and there'd be a scarcity, I don't think I would have identified toilet paper as that particular item, I have to say. So that's separate from our research, but that's more of a personal observation.
Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot, Virginia. And now let's hand it over to Sean to talk to us about creativity and its role today.
Okay, you should hear me now, Jennifer.
Yeah,
Okay, and you should see my screen as well, right?
it's fine.
Excellent. So, hello everybody. Yeah, thanks very much, Jennifer. And as you actually Simon already mentioned, the topic of my presentation is the creative fight back, which is how brands can help to win the war to survive and then revive. I lead creative excellence globally. So, you know, in the theme of what Virginia's just shown, how are we coping with the crisis at the moment? So, just a couple of scenes on the left here. You can see something we launched at the beginning of the year called Creative Corner. It's our second one, and this edition actually you'll find it on LinkedIn under my profile, Sean Dix. Actually speaks about this exact topic that we're going to see in the next couple of charts. And I was had Leslie Tang from our China office from Creative Excellence speaking about the effects of the crisis there. And then, of course, we've been having a lot of fun as well, doing virtual drinks. I'm sure all of you are doing this in your offices as well. As I'm from South Africa originally, we call it Kuza Thursdays, which is a Xhosa word for Thursday drinks. Anyway, from moving away from drinks to almost Africa, we'll take you to France, 1991, where an iconic water brand, Perrier, created this ad. In my opinion, one of the best ads of its time, and it was a complete exaggeration of this woman and lion competing for the bottle of Perrier at the top of this hill. And this ad was reincarnated in 2018, won an Effie and Cannes Lion. Why am I showing you or describing this ad? Because we know it demonstrates that creativity matters. It is magical and it should inspire us. Of course, we know that creative effectiveness drives business growth. And there is plenty of evidence, whether we look at the IPA's studies, looking at market share gains from creatively awarded campaigns, or we look at McKinsey's data that have shown stock market performance improvements for markets of the year, or even Ipsos's data. When we look at ads that perform really well, they do well in markets. So that's not probably surprising for any of you. The million-dollar question is, does creativity still matter now in times of this crisis? Well, what we can say is that going dark is not the answer, and that marketers have definitely taken a stand. There are two that I will talk about very quickly. The one, Mark Ritson, who is a professor who's spoken at many business schools around the world. He has produced a few articles over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and one of them he said, keep the brand light burning, because the cost of snuffing it out for the rest of 2020 and then trying to reignite it next year is gigantic. We saw a similar statement from General Mills, chief executive here, actually saying that people are longing for a sense of normalcy, but also he was stating that they're going to invest more now and not less. So are these two gentlemen onto something? Well, if we look at the last couple of recessions, and you can see on the chart here, we've looked at the 20s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And you can see that basically companies that have maintained or increased advertising spend during recessions or times of crisis tend to see higher sales. And actually, those orange bars are for the advertisers who have maintained or increased their advertising spend. That's all very well, and I know many of us are saying this crisis is different and probably very different to the other ones. So what do people think today? So we've done, as Simon mentioned, a lot of research and continuing to do a lot of research in the space. And what we can see is that people want entertainment and escapism, as well as being kept up to date with relevant information. So there's no reason for people to feel bad going to the shops this weekend if you're celebrating Easter and you're going to buy copious amounts of Easter bunnies. That's actually because people do want to feel a sense of escapism, feel relaxed, and generally feel unwound in this time of crisis. So what about advertising? And we've asked in the US in this case, how do people feel about advertising? And what we saw played back to us in open-ended responses is that most people actually think that advertising can bring them a sense of security. They want to feel safe and secure again. and reassured that things will go back to normal, but also that this makes them feel good and positive, which is a good sign. And very few actually said that advertisers should stop or cut. So we can see that advertisers have two weapons at their disposal: brand equity, which was spoken about in the last webinar, and advertising. Of course, advertising I've mentioned. So what are we seeing at the moment? We evaluated 10 different ads in our new methodology, Creative Spark, very quickly last week. So these were COVID communication ads, various different industries you can see, from telecoms, food and beverage, retail, and the results were extremely mixed. Is this surprising? Probably not, because a lot of advertisers are making huge efforts to get these ads developed in days. They don't have the luxury to produce them. They have minimal time for review. They're breaking all conventions and scrambling to get onto air. But what has not changed is that creative quality still matters. And what we actually saw, and I just plotted the results of these 10 ads onto a horizontal and vertical axis, and you can see branded attention on the horizontal and the vertical, short-term behavior change, and you can see 8 out of 10 have a weak ability to be memorized for the advertising brand. So what that means is that we can see cognitive immunity setting in. In layman's terms, this means that the average person will probably forget all of those ads that are being aired because it's all very generic and I see a sameness. There is an example that we've actually written about in our paper that I mentioned at the end. It's the Ford ad that was aired in the US 2 weeks ago. It's called Built to Lend a Hand. And that ad actually communicates how Ford are going to help customers at this period of crisis on actually dealing with their lease rates and giving them some relief in this period of crisis. So they're really good results, and you can see the branded attention was really strong. Also, the facial coding that we used there showed very good engagement. So you can see more details of those results in the paper, which we'll definitely be able to read. So 2 examples that we found really got it right and got the right story. And Kelly, you mentioned a lot of in your interview, a lot of what you saw from your own experience, which was pretty cool. But I think Akia did a great job here of just using that context that you described so nicely of how parents would now see their own kids working. They'd never seen how they do this before, even if they're standing at the ironing board like Virginia does at a desk. Or Vodafone Italy used a fantastic example of storytelling, of finding different kinds of scenes that are filmed in home, so using home cooking. You mentioned that, Virginia, using different ways of showing people doing TikToks, etc. Very upbeat, very optimistic, very positive, and in line with what we saw in our results as well. So 3 key principles as I come to the end of my section is 1, be authentic and faithful to what your brand stands for. Finding the right story will be very important, as we heard from many of the speakers today, and striking, I think, the right tone. I think people don't want to see advertisers capitalizing on the crisis, but still being sensitive to the fact that we are in difficult times. There's a lot more great stuff in this paper. Obviously, have a read through that. There are cases, examples, and thanks very much for listening to me now. And over to you, Jennifer, in the studio.
Thank you very much, Sean. Interesting examples. Thanks for sharing those from around the world. So while I was listening to you, I was thinking that in our everyday experience these days with our clients and with the companies that we are in touch, we see that many advertisers are pausing their activities and campaigns, but you've made it quite clear that going dark is not the answer, right?
Exactly, and we've seen that from, as I showed previous data, and we've seen actually, we've heard from Kelly, we've heard from people in our surveys that actually people want some sort of normalcy. They want to actually hear from brands at the moment, and it gives them a sense of positivity. It gives them a sense of normalcy, as I mentioned. Of course, there's a delicate balance between striking the right tone between what you say and your strategy, and I think that's very, very important as well now. So probably it's not the same old communication that you've been doing before, but certainly you need to think about that in the context of where we are right now. But certainly from everything that we've seen, from our past data, we've looked at our own databases, there's no evidence that suggests going dark and pausing things is actually good for your brand right now, actually the contrary.
Great. Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you to all the speakers and to all the friends that have been with us today. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks' time for our next Signals webinar. Thank you very much and have a lovely evening or day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.